Welcome to What Was He Thinking? My name is A.B. Bracewell. Today I'm going to be your personal tour guide through a man's psyche. Take this journey as we explore why a man thinks the way he thinks, why a man acts the way he acts, and why a man feels the way he feels. No questions off limits, and no topics too hard. By the end of the show, you'll have a better insight and a better understanding of who we are as men. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest. This brother that I'm joined by, I kind of lose track of his titles. CEO, COO, CFO. You name it, this brother, he does it. He's big in the business world, in the financial world, and he's big in the relationship world. This brother has his own show that airs on Instagram, which is called Wednesdays with Wes, where he speaks about everything relationships. He also does his events. He does a national event called the Relationship Script. He has done events here in Philadelphia. He's done events in the DC area, in the Atlanta area, even down to Jamaica. He has taken it. He's taken this event national. We call him Donovan the Hitchmaster West. I'm going to allow him to also introduce himself when I add him to the stream. But please, if you're watching through YouTube or if you're going to watch it later on the show, just give this brother a warm welcome, Mr. Donovan the Hitchmaster West.
Hey, what's going on, man?
Man, what's up? What's up? How you feeling?
AB, I feel wonderful, man. I can't complain at all. Thank you so much for having me.
Did I do justice introducing you, or is there more?
You did. Listen, you know me and how we met, man. We met as humble servants, and that's just
Exactly.
who we still are, brother. So just refer to me as that, and we good.
All right, that's my brother. That's my brother. So we're gonna jump right into it. The topic of the show is the sexual education of Black men in America. So it's a very deep topic. As Black men in America, we go through all type of lessons, and we have all types of influences when it comes to sex. So I decided to have this series, not only as a way for us to speak man to man about these things, but also to help the generations coming up behind us on how to learn, or how they can learn from some of the mistakes we made, and how we can probably even better educate them. Because this specific topic tonight is called healing the hurt because. So we're gonna be talking a lot about the unhealthy lessons that we learn, growing up, and as we develop as from childhood into manhood about sex, and how it affects not only women, how it affects the way we look at relationships, and how it affects our community even. So I always like to start, where so we can establish some type of baseline. The sexual education that you received growing up and developing into manhood, would you describe it as unhealthy or healthy?
I would describe it as unhealthy. It was unhealthy for a number of reasons. I mean, number one, I may be dating myself, but back when I was coming up, sex ed was something that I think was extremely controversial. So I think there was a lot more concern around, just even talking about it, much less getting into the details of it, right? And being able to be, robust or aggressive, comprehensive about your approach when it comes to talking about sexuality, much less, just, sex ed, period. So I think that it definitely was unhealthy because what you're armed with is instead of like some of the more finer tools, it's like having I don't know, teaching construction and say here's a hammer and here's a wrench and that's it, right? It's like what can you actually build with that as opposed to, you know, giving you all the tools, and it really expands what you can build from, what your foundation is. So I think because of the lack of the tools, you know, the foundation really wasn't as sturdy as it should be.
Yeah. So with that being said, how do you think the education that we received about sex, how did it actually form or influence the way we approach relationships or the way we looked at women?
Well, I don't think it really informed us. I don't think it really had much of an impact at all, because I don't know if you went to a better school than me, but I don't remember it ever talking about like relationships. I don't remember it ever talking about, you know, being, you know, being more clear in terms of how you communicate, right? All I saw was how, you know, this is anatomy, right? This is that person's anatomy, and when the two come together, this is what happens. I don't ever
Mm,
recall conversations around, you know, in greater levels of communication, or really getting to know someone, or really what do you do in a breakup, or when things like, I don't recall any of that. The only time I seen any type of thing where you saw people talking about relationships were in sitcoms, right?
mm,
So, you know, that's the only time I recall seeing that. I don't recall seeing anything in school where it speaks to, you know, this is how you should talk to, or this is the kind of environment that you need to create in order to have a meaningful discussion about whatever may be taking place. Like even when you look at the scene where the girl is like, "Hey, Bobby, I got something to tell you," and he looks over and he's like, "What?" And then she's like, "I'm pregnant," you know, and
mm,
he's like, "What? Is it mine?" You know, and then she gets like, you don't see anything else besides like that scene, and that scene is just looked at as a crisis, and then now what, right? As
yeah.
opposed to, you know, so, you know, having some more intelligent dialogue, or even the conversation being one that starts in a different space where you start to talk about, okay, you know, what are your feelings about that? Like, what do we, you know, what should we do? How should we, like, what kind of environment should you create for her, even as she's expressing herself about, you know, being pregnant? You know, what's the right way to do it versus the guy always being the one that's just looking there stupid, like, oh man, like, you know, why
Mm,
can't it be a relationship, or why can't we demonstrate like what a healthy exchange looks like, right? So in terms of what education did, you know, back then, none of those types of scenarios I saw really being depicted, where it gave, you know, men even a standard to ascribe to say, you know what, I want to be that guy who's able to communicate in such a way, who's able to foster the kind of environment where she feels comfortable to bring up this new news or whatever, or, you know, or the guy that responds in a way that's like, that's positive and says, you know what, you know, I know that's not what we intended, but look, let's, you know, let's talk about how we're going to embrace this situation, this crisis together. Um, I never saw scenes like that, so maybe you saw
mm,
something like that, but I didn't see that back when I was coming up.
mm. No, I definitely see it. Didn't see it. And like it's funny that that you keep mentioning like sex education in school, because when I'm thinking about my sexual education, I don't even the thought of school sex education doesn't even cross my mind, because it was really, it didn't exist. We had maybe health class, and they'll show you how to put a condom on, and that was about it. My real education, or maybe I should say miseducation about sex, came from the neighborhood, came from my community. I grew up next door to a pimp, a real live pimp. Like I'm not. I didn't. I grew up in the '90s, in the '80s, but this guy was like a real pimp from the '70s, and he had, you know, women coming through. He had a limousine. He had his pimp friends, and that was the type of stuff that we looked at. Like the boys, the black boys in my neighborhood on my block. That's the type of stuff we looked at growing up, and kind of emulate. You know, that's the type of stuff that we kind of glorified and championed, because that was the education we was receiving in my community. And that definitely had an influence on the way we approach relationships and the way we view women. If you grow up looking at a pimp, and you know he's prostituting women, you
Right.
know, you start to look at them women as a sexual object. You know, I'm not even fully human. And aside from my personal experience of growing up next to a pimp, you know, then you take in consideration the music that we grow up listening to, and you know, trends and just the different teachings about sex. Like it doesn't really speak to the relationship part. It doesn't speak to
I
the
totally agree with you.
intimacy part. It doesn't speak to any of that part when it
No,
comes
no, it
to sex, when it,
none of
especially
it at
about.
all, good brother. None
Mm-hmm.
of it at all. And you know, often I know when you ask me the question and I respond within the context of school is because everything else, you know, when you talk about the neighborhood, when you talk about, you know, even friends, even some family members, I call that, I don't call it sex ed. I call it sex influence, right? Yeah, I call,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's they're not educating because they're not even educated themselves. So I can't
Mm-hmm.
even do that. But you know, at least in school, you know, God bless their hearts. They tried. They looked up some stuff or whatever. They failed horribly, but you know, they attempted to get it started somewhere. I think in the neighborhoods, like you said just now, you know, we look at each other as bodies, man. Real talk, you know. We look at each
Mm-hmm.
other's bodies. You see her. What's the first thing we do? I mean, let's be honest. We're animals first, right? The reason why we talk about being civilized is because it's the discipline, right? It's a mindset to remove yourself at least a little bit away from your animal tendencies, right? Your instinct. But the first thing that we do when we see one another, we look at each other, we size each other up, we're checking out body types and everything else, and that's something that'll never change. You know, but we want to be more civil in terms of what do we do now? What do we do next? Right after that moment, and I believe that you know, especially growing up, first thing, you know, the first thing that's coming to mind is like you know whether or not she's old enough, right? Whether or not
Mm-hmm.
she, you know, whether or not she, you know, whether or not she is out there or not. You know what's going like that kind of thing. That's the first thing that is popping up just casually as people are, you know, we're all together talking or whatever. And you know, for myself, I didn't grow up next to a pimp, but I definitely had those same kinds of influences where, you know, whether you're talking about what's on TV or you're talking about what's in the neighborhood, the first thing is about making sure that you have numbers, right? What defined you as a pimp yourself, right? On a less you know vocational side of things, but more just on the social side of things. You a pimp because you got you know you got bodies, you got a lot of girls, you slept with a lot of girls, or you got a nice stable as they call it, right? The fact that we
Mm-hmm.
call it a stable, that you have a nice stable, you know, what's a stable? A stable is for horses, right? It's not for
Yeah.
ladies, but that's you know that's what we say. Oh, you got a nice stable. So I think at the end of the day, you know, just looking at the fact that you're right, we're looking at women as like their bodies, their tools. You know, it's just they're used for our entertainment. And you know, the more you get, the more actually you get stripes on your arm. I remember, you know, back in the day, that was one of the things. It's like, yo, you got another body, or you bagged another bad one. Oh, okay, and
Mm-hmm.
literally putting stripes. I didn't
Yeah.
mean to wear the shirt for like that, but nah, this ain't me.
Validation.
But
You got a lot of stripes on that shirt, I ain't,
or
but.
yeah, right. But they would literally be like, "Oh, you got another stripe," right? So I
Mhm.
think that you know, that became like the definition of you know who you are and how you were respected, so to speak. And you know, we're all young men at that time. So what's the first thing we're thinking about is how to further identify ourselves, create our own selves as a brand. And that's problematic, especially when you start talking about it's at the hands of and at the hearts of, right, at the spirit of people that you know that are really victims of this toxic mindset, right? So
Yeah.
that's the that's the as you talk about the misinformation, and I call it, you know, the sex influence, not the sex education, because you know they tried it, but the reality is that it's just it's a nasty pull that's you know that is a response from you know the toxic mindset that's typically propagated all day and night, like literally at every moment. We you know with our phones. It's all in there. It's in everything that we do, everything we hear. Um, you know, but I think that what you talk about earlier around you know understanding like the difference, right? Like okay, I'm getting this. Like who am I getting this from, right? Like the fact that
Uh-huh.
you can get the information and you're like, well, this information I'm getting, this education I'm getting, who am I getting? I'm getting this from a print, or
Yeah.
I'm getting this from my boy who, you know, that's
Nothing.
all he do, right? Or like
Uh-huh.
literally being able to say, okay, the source of the information, the source of the education is something that I first need to take inventory of, right? That might help dilute a little bit,
Yeah.
what's coming into my brain.
Yeah. So that leads me to my next question. After we speak about where we got the information, the sexual influence or the miseducation, and we took that information that we received and we applied it, and we applied it to women. So the topic is healing the hurt that we caused. How do you think our unhealthy sexual habits affect women when we talk about mentally and psychologically and emotionally? Like, can you speak to that? How does it actually
Oh
affect?
yeah, I remember. I remember I was 13 when I started high school, and I was 6'4". Little goatee. Looked like a grown man, acted like a grown man. Very, a lot of people used to say I was very intelligent for my age, and all I did was read, and just I was on some other stuff like, oh, I'm so much older, so much mature, so much ahead. I was just
Mhm.
feeling myself. Started high school, had a girlfriend who was a senior in high school. As soon as so I was already starting off like just
You said you was a freshman.
I was a freshman and she was a senior. She
Okay.
was 18.
Okay.
And so I recall, going through that process, and literally I lost my virginity to her, and I remember the episode where literally, you know, um, I won't say who said it, but they were like, "Look, you come out of this room a man, okay?" And
Mhm.
that's how I got down. Like, okay, I'm gonna go in here a boy, I'm gonna come out a man after I have sex, after I lose my virginity. And
Mhm.
that was crazy. Now thinking about that, right? The influence, not the education, right? As I call it. So, did that and was in this relationship. Uh, didn't know what I was doing. I'm a kid, but here I am in that situation. And at some point, she caught feelings, I caught feelings in terms of like, okay, that's my girl or whatever. Um, and I broke her heart at the end of the day. She was someone that was like, wanted to be like, let's go to prom, let's do this, let's do all this stuff. And I was like,
Mhm.
no, it was not even that serious. But because I succumbed to the influence, right? I was doing things that I really shouldn't have been doing. And at the end of the day, I heard her, At some point, I remember later in that year, she was like, oh, I'm pregnant. And I was like, what? And it wasn't true, but I remember going through that emotion like, yo, my life is over. This is crazy, blah, blah, blah. But I remember going through that process and saying to myself, like, this is all coming so fast, right? I'm
Mhm.
only, 13, turned 14, and here it is. We're talking all this stuff. But more importantly, just reflecting on it years later, just thinking about just how bad I hurt her, right? I
Yeah.
remember her saying that, if you don't go to prom with me, I'm not going to go with anyone, And she didn't go with anyone, and just saying like how hurt she must have been, how devastated she must have been to not have gone with anyone. And to know that it was because of me. I did that, right? So that was like the first of many reckless, decisions that I made. But so I'm just putting it out there, being totally transparent.
Nah,
Reflecting on
that's
that.
yeah.
Say it again.
I always say that's how people really learn, and that's how you impact people. When you're transparent, so I appreciate that. And
Yeah.
it's crazy how you say at the age of 14, we're taught to be so detached from the act of sex, so emotionally detached. Like like you said before, it just becomes transactional. It's just an act. It's just us maybe satisfying our horniness. But on the other side of the thing, the young lady, was really in love, and she really became attached. And we're almost conditioned to look at sex as just, hey, it's just something to do for fun.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
And so
that,
we.
you gotta be careful. I talk about a lot now, in terms of, making sure that you understand, what season you're in and what season other people are in. It's important because, just like that in that episode of life, I'm thinking recreationally, right? I'm thinking transactionally. And
Hmm.
and she's thinking about something else. She's in her senior year, and people that tend to be in their last year, they get a little bit more sentimental about things, right? And start
Hmm.
thinking about things in a different kind of manner. So I never really thought about it that way. Obviously, I'm just walking into that space, and so there was a lot there that I didn't take inventory of. And I really definitely I have to push replay and say to myself, dang, how did I get there? And a large part of that was that influence. A large part of that was the desire to make sure that I completed the overall profile, right? It's like, okay, you 6 foot. At that time I was 6'4". Um,
Hmm.
Here it is. I wear clothes that looks a little more mature. I move a certain kind of way. Sometimes I'm
Hmm.
sliding into a club or whatever. I can pass for being 21. I'm in this
Hmm.
whole space. So what's the one thing that I'm not doing that adults are doing, right? So that okay, I'm gonna go there and that's what I'm gonna do, right? Not
Yeah.
knowing that at the end of the day, there's a whole other side to that. Like you said, an emotional side, a spiritual side, mentally, it's just a lot of components to it that still today, right? Many adults are still struggling to understand that. And it's not to say that there isn't a space in place where people may function in a less deeper kind of I guess, environment where they think, well, this can be, lightweight, right? This can be recreational. This can be just kind of whatever,
Hmm.
hit and go, that kind of thing. But I think at the end of the day, when we start talking about peeling back the layers, like, what's the root of that? Like, what really is, if I were to go back to like point zero, and how did that mindset, that kind of energy, that kind of mind, that framework that you're looking at everything, how was
Yeah.
that created? What were the influence of that? And I think many people, if you get them to be courageous enough to peel back those layers and go back to the genesis of it, they'll be surprised, right, to see who was
Yeah.
around, what influences actually helped to create that uh that
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah, that's definitely a good question to explore, and I'm sure I'm going to ask that to another guest that I have. But before we wrap this up, I have one more question, and the whole reason for me even having these talks or having this show is really to influence upcoming generations, or even guys that don't know, in a more positive way. So, what advice would you give a younger guy, or a nephew, or just somebody you're mentoring, as far as the appropriate way of managing their sexual behavior, their sexuality, so it doesn't result in them hurting other people, or hurting women, I should say. What advice would you give them? What tips would you give them on managing that stuff?
Number one, I will tell them what many women and young ladies hear all the time, right? Know your worth. We hear all day and night, and I love it. I'm not saying that any of it should cease in terms of the value of women, and women, being, encouraging other women to know your worth and understand that. But men need to understand that they are also extremely valuable, that they are precious, that who they are and what they bring to this world is of maximum value, and that they need to honor themselves in that way as well. You can see, society is taught men to say, oh, well, go ahead and, sow your oats and do all this stuff. But at the end of the day, what you got to understand is that, you dilute yourself, right? You dilute your seed. And so running around doing this, that, and the other, what does that really define? I'm not going to be, going to sit here and say, oh, you need to sit here and ponder and go to this place and or go to the hilltop and really think for 40 days and 40 nights before you actually engage with anyone. I'm not going to front on you and say all that, but I'm saying to also be mindful that just because it's available doesn't mean that you should go ahead and partake of it. And so while I definitely have my history of bad decisions, I also have a history of saying no a lot. I've definitely been called a heartbreaker in my time for
Mhm.
turning down and having that tough conversation. Not as much as I should have, but I know definitely a lot of times I did. And I would share with the young man is just know your worth. Just know that at the end of the day, you're more than just your body parts. You're more than just that moment. You're more than even that urge that you may have.
Mm.
Is you got to think, and start playing chess, so to speak, and just know that what you have is extremely valuable as well. And society has a twisted way of showing that what you have can just be dispersed, just as just so easily and freely. And
Yeah.
what women have is supposed to be so precious. It is precious, but at the end of the day, you are too. So just be very, very much cautious and move with a discerning eye too, because not everything that glitters is gold. And just because she may be pretty, or just because she may desire you, doesn't mean that you just go ahead and do an automatic. You also can hold you can hold the cards, so to speak, in terms of whether or not it goes to that level of sexual intimacy. And I say that's
Mm.
purposely to say sexual intimacy, because true intimacy, if I had another thing to share with that young man, is to say that true intimacy has nothing to do with sex. True
Yeah.
intimacy is being able to understand someone's beliefs, their what their fears are. True intimacy is being able to have a conversation with someone about what really motivates them or inspires them, what their challenges are in life. True intimacy is when you're able to actually think of that person first when you want to talk about what you're going through, or if you just need to be in the same space and just be silent for a second, or to pray. Like, that's true intimacy, because you can't get that everywhere. But trust and believe it, when it comes to sex, you can get it anywhere. I don't care who you are. You can get that anywhere, but you cannot get someone that will actually listen to you and serve you in a way that God intended. So that's true intimacy. But we got to change the game. We got to change the narrative around what's really most important. And one of those things, beyond just the definition of intimacy, is just that men themselves have to see themselves of being of real value and of real worth, so that when you're in front of somebody, you're looking at shorty, you're like, I don't know if she's like, well, all right, let's do this. You need to look at her and be like, I don't know if we should do this. Like, let's talk some
Mm.
more. Let's think. Let me think about, is this a real, this is not us just getting it in. This is an investment, pun intended. I'm gonna stop on that.
Okay. Good brother. I always appreciate when I can sit down and talk to you. Hopefully when this thing is over, we can sit down and talk face to face and continue to build. But I always appreciate
Sure.
your wisdom and insight, when I get a chance to grab a hold of you. Please tell the people where they can find you, where they can follow you, what you got going on, all that good
Well,
stuff.
thank you, man. First of all, thank you for inviting me again. And you can catch me on the relationship script, and as you mentioned, every Wednesday from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m., we talk about anything under the sun, related to relationships. And of course, on the gram as well, Donovan S. West, Donavan S. West, just like it's on this on the screen. And of course, on Facebook, the same thing, as well as LinkedIn. So I'm happy to have this conversation with you, and thanks for creating the kind of space to be transparent.
But there you have it, folks. What was he thinking? The sexual education of Black men in America. Once again, I want to give thank you to my brother Donovan West. But the conversation is not over yet. Now, on the next episode, we will have the ladies. They join us. They join the broadcast, and they're going to put me and Donovan on the hot seat. They're gonna watch the episode, and they got some questions that they want answers to. So please stay tuned, stay connected. AB Bracewell for What Was He Thinking? God bless.